by scratching the surface, you get a terrible shock. It's a heinous crime.
Highgrove House had always been more than a private residence. It was memory, marriage, power, and belonging wrapped behind stone walls and guarded gates. But on that morning, the gates did not simply close. They delivered a message. Camilla arrived expecting entry into the home she believed was hers by royal right, only to be stopped by security carrying orders from King Charles's office. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla did not speak at first. She sat in the back of the car, one hand locked around the door handle, her face held in that frozen space between disbelief and humiliation. The guard outside kept his voice low, but the words could not be softened. The queen consort was not to be admitted. Highgrove House, Charles's personal country home and the place most closely tied to his private life before the crown claimed him, had been placed under a restriction that reached directly from the king's own office. Charles had already made the decision before she reached the gate. Somewhere away from the road, away from the stunned silence inside that car, the king sat with the weight of an order that looked clean on paper but felt brutal in the heart. His office had not sent a casual message. It had issued a written directive, the kind of instruction palace security understood, without needing emotion attached to it. No confusion, no delay, no misunderstanding. Camilla was refused entry at Highgrove because security had specific instructions not to allow her inside. The guard did not improvise. He did not ask for guidance. He did not step aside after seeing who she was. That was what made the moment devastating. The queen consort had arrived as someone who believed the gates would recognize her place, yet the gates answered to someone else. Behind the scenes, a senior aide removed her name from the expected arrivals list, and with that small administrative act, the private wound became part of the palace machine. Camilla looked toward the entrance, and the silence around her seemed louder than any public insult. She understood the meaning before anyone explained it. Charles had not merely paused her visit. He had allowed his office to create distance, and distance inside a royal marriage can sound like exile when it happens at a locked gate. And before the palace could explain the locked gate, everyone inside the royal circle began asking the same dangerous question. Who had Charles chosen to protect? And who had he finally decided to shut out? A royal order is never just paper. It carries fingerprints, loyalties, fears, and wounds that have been gathering in silence. Behind the Highgrove refusal stood people who knew exactly what that gate meant. Camilla saw rejection. Charles saw necessity. William saw a line finally drawn. And every aide who witnessed it understood one thing. The monarchy had entered dangerous emotional territory. Charles felt the cost before anyone else spoke it aloud. The king had spent years guarding Highgrove as a place of peace, routine, and personal memory. Yet now his own office had turned that sanctuary into the center of a family crisis. The queen consort, a title meaning the wife of the reigning monarch without the ruling power of the monarch herself, had believed those gates still carried emotional promise. To her, Highgrove was not only a house. It was proof that she belonged beside him in the private spaces where duty usually stopped. Camilla called him first. The phone rang, and then went cold. She stared at the screen as if the silence itself had answered her, and pride began to break into something more painful. She had faced public judgment before, but this felt different because it came from inside the circle. Charles did not reject her in a speech. He let an unanswered call do the damage, and the queen consort understood the cruelty of that quiet more clearly than any headline could explain. William received the news in a brief private exchange with a senior aide. The prince did not smile. He did not celebrate. He asked only whether the order had been confirmed through Charles's office, because he understood the difference between a family disagreement and an official boundary. Highgrove mattered because it touched the king's private authority, and if that authority had been used against Camilla, then the monarchy had crossed from tension into consequence. William chose every word carefully, knowing the future king could not appear eager for another person's humiliation. A palace aide whispered later, through a documented account shared privately with the household, that the order had passed through Charles's office after a closed-door meeting the previous evening. That detail changed everything. The security team at Highgrove had not only been told to refuse entry, they had been instructed to avoid discussion, avoid explanation, and avoid being drawn into argument. Someone had expected Camilla to push back. Someone had prepared for the pain before she arrived. The refusal suddenly looked less like a moment and more like a verdict. Charles had chosen silence. Camilla had been left outside. William had seen the line harden. And to understand why the king's office would send such a devastating instruction, the story has to move backward to the moment that turned private tension into a royal breaking point. Every palace crisis has a moment people later remember differently. Some call it the beginning, others call it the warning. But for those close to Charles, the point of no return came during a private dinner at Clarence House, when one sentence changed the room, hardened William's expression, and left the king staring at his plate, as if he had just heard the future crack open. Camilla had entered that dinner expecting a private family discussion, not a test of her place. Clarence House, the royal residence long used by Charles before he became king, carried its own emotional weight, because it had been a place of planning, recovery, and quiet control. That evening, Charles sat between marriage and monarchy, while William listened with the stillness of a man who already sensed that the conversation was bigger than one household. Two senior aides remained nearby, not speaking unless asked, because access to royal residences meant more than keys. It meant trust. Camilla made the sentence sound simple. She questioned why William's office should have any influence over Highgrove arrangements, then called it a family home, not a committee decision. The room changed. The queen consort looked toward Charles as if expecting support, but the king did not answer quickly enough. William went silent first, and that silence carried more force than anger. The prince finally said Highgrove belonged to the king's private world, but it could not be used to bypass the wider discipline of the crown, meaning the rules and duties that keep the monarchy stable. Charles lowered his eyes. He heard Camilla's hurt, but he also heard the truth William had placed on the table. Highgrove mattered because it was personal, and that made it dangerous. If private access became a way around official order, then the king's own sanctuary could become the weakest door in the royal system. Camilla saw the shift in him. She knew the monarch beside her was no longer only a husband trying to keep peace. He was becoming the final judge of a boundary she never believed would touch her. A senior aide later noted in a documented household account that after the dinner, Charles requested a review of access privileges, guest approvals, and security instructions linked to Highgrove. That review uncovered the deeper wound. Camilla had expected personal access to remain untouched, while the king's office had begun treating Highgrove as a controlled royal space during a period of internal strain. The dinner did not end with shouting. It ended with silence, and that silence followed Charles into the meeting where the Highgrove order was finalized. By the time Camilla reached the gate, the confrontation had already happened in spirit, but nothing could prepare the palace for what came when she demanded to face the decision herself. Humiliation at a palace gate is not easily swallowed. Camilla had endured whispers before, but this was different. This was a refusal in daylight, carried out by uniformed security, backed by the king's own office. And when she finally reached Charles by phone, her voice did not tremble with confusion. It carried the force of someone demanding to know who had turned a marriage into an order. Camilla left Highgrove, but she did not leave the wound behind. The queen consort sat rigid as the car moved away, her pride fighting with the ache of being stopped at a place tied to marriage and acceptance. Highgrove mattered because it was not a neutral property. It was the king's private country home, where family access carried emotional meaning as well as practical permission. Charles understood that meaning too. He was in a private room with one senior aide when the call arrived. This was no schedule issue. This was a reckoning. Camilla asked the question directly. Did the order come from him? Charles did not answer at once, and that pause struck harder than any denial. The king knew silence could sound like guilt, but he also knew one careless sentence could turn discipline into open war. She pressed him again, and this time her voice sharpened. The queen consort wanted not policy, not palace language, not careful phrases. She wanted to know whether her husband had allowed security to turn her away from his door. Charles finally told her the instruction had moved through his office for reasons of stability. That word wounded her. Stability sounded noble inside a palace note, but to Camilla, it sounded like rejection dressed in official language. The king's office, meaning the small team that manages his private decisions and formal instructions, had spoken with his authority. No guard at Highgrove would challenge it, and no aide could pretend it was informal. Charles had placed monarchy above comfort, and she heard the choice. Camilla then asked whether William had influenced him. The name entered the call like a match near dry paper. Charles refused to blame the prince, saying only that certain boundaries had to be restored. Yet that answer revealed more than he intended. The order was not sudden anger. It was part of a wider reset inside the household, where trust and private power were being measured again. Camilla ended the call without farewell. Charles remained seated, phone in hand, staring at the silence she left behind. The confrontation was over, but the deeper battle had just begun, because once emotion faded, the machinery behind the decision began to reveal who held power inside the king's private world. The most devastating royal decisions are often delivered without raised voices. No shouting, no public declaration. Just a memo, a revised list, a quiet instruction passed from one desk to another. That was what made the Highgrove order so chilling. It did not sound like anger, it sounded like control. And in palace life, control is always the clearest language of power. Charles's office became the place where private pain turned into official force. The king's office, meaning the small team that handles his instructions, diary, household decisions, and sensitive communications, was no longer simply managing a schedule. It was drawing a boundary that touched the marriage itself. That mattered because royal households survive on clear lines. Who may enter? Who may speak? Who may approve access? These choices reveal where trust still lives, and where it has quietly died. A senior private secretary reviewed the Highgrove access note with the care of someone handling a blade. The instruction was limited. It was specific. It carried proper authority. No emotional words appeared on the page, but the meaning was impossible to miss. Camilla was not to be admitted to Highgrove without direct clearance from Charles's office. The queen consort was not being kept away by gossip or confusion. She was being stopped by a rule that had passed through the king's own system. Charles read the final version alone. He set it down slowly, and for a moment he said nothing. The king did not ask for it to be withdrawn. That silence told the senior aide everything. Charles was not acting like a furious husband. He was acting like a monarch who believed waiting would make the wound deeper. Delay might have protected Camilla's pride for one more day, but it could have weakened the discipline around Highgrove for months. He had chosen the harder cruelty because he believed the softer choice would cost the crown more. The aide watching him understood the sadness beneath the resolve. Charles had spent years turning Highgrove into a symbol of calm and personal identity, and now that same place had become a test of command. A second note was prepared for internal security teams, warning that no exceptions were to be made through informal family requests. That detail mattered because it showed fear from within. Palace officials expected pressure. They expected someone to try to bend the order through private influence. Camilla's circle learned the truth before the palace found language to contain it. The order may have looked controlled on paper, but its consequences began escaping at once. And when private authority becomes public humiliation, the first cracks rarely appear in official statements. They appear on the faces of the people forced to live under the new rules. The palace can contain a scandal for hours, sometimes days, but it cannot contain emotion forever. By afternoon, the refusal at Highgrove had begun moving through private corridors like smoke under a door. No announcement had been made. No explanation had been given. Yet everyone sensed the same thing. A royal boundary had shifted, and Camilla was no longer standing where she stood before. Camilla returned to her private rooms, carrying the silence of the gate with her. The queen consort removed her gloves slowly, finger by finger, as if every small movement had to be controlled before her anger escaped. A trusted companion stood nearby and said nothing, because the change in her face was enough. This was not a public separation, meaning a formal break between husband and wife announced to the country. This was not a punishment with a title, but because it happened at Highgrove, it carried the emotional force of both. Charles received the update in a short message from a senior aide. The king was told that Camilla had been informed the restriction would continue, and his expression tightened before he looked away. He had signed nothing in a rage. He had allowed no public cruelty. Yet the decision was now doing what all hard decisions do. It was leaving bruises on real people. Highgrove mattered because it was tied to his private heart, and keeping the queen consort away from it made the wound feel personal, even if the reason was royal discipline. William was told soon after that Camilla believed he had pushed Charles into the order. The prince did not defend himself with anger. He did not send a message through aides. He chose silence, and that silence became its own form of control. The future king understood that any denial from him would feed the fire. If he looked too eager to clear his name, It would make the refusal seem like a family battle, instead of a decision from the king's office. A palace aide then discovered that Camilla's next scheduled appearance beside Charles had been quietly placed under review. That detail changed the atmosphere again. The Highgrove refusal was no longer only about one locked gate or one painful journey turned back. It hinted at a wider shift in how the queen consort would move beside the king, how close she could stand, and how much trust still surrounded her role. Camilla heard none of this through an official explanation. She felt it through silence, delay, and changed behavior. Charles knew the fallout had reached its most dangerous point, so he agreed to meet her privately, without aides, without notes, and without anyone left to soften the truth. For the first time since the gate closed, the story moves away from offices, lists, and security teams, and into a room where only two people can decide what the refusal truly meant. There are moments in royal life when titles fall away, and only the person remains. No aides, no palace language, no polished explanation, just a husband, a wife, and the damage between them. When Charles and Camilla finally met in private, the Highgrove order was no longer a security instruction. It became a question of trust, belonging, and whether love can survive the discipline of the crown. Charles entered the small sitting room, knowing there would be no shield this time. The king had no senior aide beside him, no written note to soften the meaning, no careful household phrase to hide behind. Camilla waited with the stillness of someone who had spent hours turning pain into control. Highgrove had become more than a residence in that room. It was now a symbol of where personal privilege, meaning access granted because of closeness or family position, ended, and royal authority began. Camilla spoke first. She told Charles that being stopped at the gate had not made her feel managed. It had made her feel erased. The queen consort did not raise her voice, and that restraint made the words heavier. She reminded him that Highgrove had been a place where she believed the private part of their life still existed, untouched by pressure, untouched by suspicion, untouched by the cold hand of official order. The king listened without interrupting, and his silence was not avoidance now. It was punishment he accepted. Charles answered slowly. He admitted the order had been painful, but he said it had become necessary. Highgrove could no longer become a place where unresolved tensions entered through side doors, where family emotion quietly worked around palace discipline. The crown, meaning the institution of monarchy and the duty attached to the sovereign, needed boundaries stronger than personal comfort. Camilla heard the explanation, but she also heard the distance inside it. The king was not asking her to understand as a wife. He was asking her to accept as someone living under royal command. Camilla asked once more whether William had forced the decision. Charles did not hide behind the prince. He confirmed the responsibility was his, and that answer removed one suspicion while opening a deeper wound. The queen consort realized the true pain was not that security obeyed the office. It was that Charles had allowed the office to speak where he once would have spoken himself. That was the betrayal she could not easily swallow. Charles did not reach for her. Camilla did not move toward him. The meeting ended with no embrace, but with something more final. She accepted that the gate would remain closed until trust was rebuilt on his terms. What happened behind that door would never be fully shared. But by the next morning, the world outside the palace had already found its own image of the crisis. By dawn, the royal silence had become impossible to control. What began as a private refusal at Highgrove turned into a national symbol. A queen consort stopped at the gate of the king's beloved home. The public did not need every detail to understand the emotional force of it. One locked entrance, one security order, one unanswered question, and Britain knew something had changed. Camilla watched the morning broadcast without moving. The queen consort sat in silence as the presenter described the refusal as the clearest royal boundary in years, and her face tightened at the phrase. Palace communications teams had prepared a restrained response, saying only that household arrangements and private scheduling were being handled with care. The statement sounded calm, but calm words could not soften the image. Highgrove was not a generic royal property. It was Charles's sanctuary, a private country home tied to his memories, habits, and sense of control. Charles received the press summary with visible fatigue. The king read the first page, then placed it down as if the paper had become heavier in his hand. He had hoped the decision would remain inside the household, because a household matter means a private issue, managed by staff and family, rather than debated by the nation. But the gate had escaped its own walls. The monarch now understood that the order he allowed for discipline had become a public measure of his marriage, his authority, and his willingness to let Camilla feel the cost of royal control. The front page made the crisis impossible to shrink. One newspaper carried a large photo of Highgrove's closed gate beneath the headline, "The Queen Consort Kept Out." The words were blunt. They did not explain policy. They did not mention careful palace language. They gave the country one image and one conclusion. Camilla had been refused entry, and Charles had not reversed it. The Queen Consort saw that headline repeated across screens, and whatever pride she had tried to hold began to turn into something colder. A small crowd gathered near the Highgrove perimeter, not wild, not shouting, but watchful. One elderly woman told a broadcaster, "That gate said more than the palace ever will." The sentence traveled quickly because it captured what official statements could not. People understood symbols. They understood doors. They understood the pain of being kept out. Charles did not reverse the order. Public opinion did not soften him, and Camilla knew that mattered most. The closed gate had become a national image, and the palace could no longer treat the refusal as a household matter. It had become a defining statement about Charles, Camilla, and the future discipline of the crown. In the end, the Highgrove refusal was not remembered because a car stopped at a gate. It was remembered because the gate told the truth before anyone inside the palace was ready to say it aloud. Charles had made a choice. Camilla had felt the cost. William had watched the monarchy tighten its spine. And the crown had shown that even love has limits when trust is broken. Camilla understood the verdict before anyone named it. The Queen Consort had not been destroyed by the refusal, but she had been changed by it. Highgrove had once felt like proof that closeness to Charles still opened every private door. Now it had become proof of the opposite. The crown, meaning the monarchy as an institution with rules, duties, and authority beyond personal feeling, had reached into the king's own household and drawn a line that even she could not cross. That mattered because royal power survives only when personal privilege does not swallow public discipline. Charles carried the burden quietly. The king knew that leadership sometimes means allowing one person to feel wounded, so the institution does not appear weak. He had not chosen comfort. He had not chosen the easy warmth of pretending nothing had shifted. He chose order, and that choice cut directly into the life he shared with Camilla. The monarch understood the cruelty of it, but he also understood the danger of hesitation. If Highgrove could be treated as untouchable because it was personal, then every private space around the throne could become a doorway for pressure. William's role finally became clear. The prince did not need to force the king's hand, because Charles had already reached the conclusion that Highgrove needed protection from internal tension. The future king had watched the monarchy tighten its spine, but the decision belonged to the man who wore the crown. That truth mattered, because it ended the idea that the refusal was only a family battle. It was stronger than that. It was a royal boundary, carried out with painful precision. Camilla was left with the hardest lesson of all. Love could bring her near the throne, but trust would decide how far she could move inside its private world. The gate became the symbol of the entire crisis, not a rejection of marriage alone, but a declaration that royal trust must be earned, maintained, and never assumed. The Queen Consort had been kept outside Highgrove, but the deeper message reached every room in the palace. There is no unresolved ending here. The gate closed, the message landed, and every person involved understood the same final truth. Highgrove had not merely refused Camilla entry, it had revealed exactly where power now lived. Camilla's exclusion was the moment the monarchy chose order over comfort, authority over avoidance, and consequence over silence. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.